There. I hope everybody's safe and sound. I know these aren't ideal circumstances, but this is the situation that we're in. On Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, I'm going to be running the newest IOC schedule. I think this one is going to take. I've got buy-in from the administration, and I think we're going to be able to run this. On Monday, which is an ABCD day, I'm supposed to meet with the SL students. I'm going to cancel class on Monday, and then the next day that you were supposed to have off because of the reduced IB schedule, I'm taking that class back. So you can use that time to get ready for your other classes or do homework or whatever it is that you need to do. I hope that makes sense. The IOCs that are running on Monday and Tuesday are in the office conference room. They're behind Viviana's desk, and we're going to be running those all day on Monday and Tuesday, so I'll be difficult to reach. If you need something desperately, WhatsApp me. This is the new IOC schedule. I do want to remind the people who are coming on Sunday, if you feel unsafe or if your parents feel unsafe, please make some arrangements with me so that we can reschedule. We still can do that, and it's not a problem. I do apologize. I'm not John Green, and these videos aren't going to be that kind of quality. I am going to be talking about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern in some detail, and I suggest you follow along with me in your book. You pause me when necessary to find things or mark things, and you take notes. I'm going to be going more or less in chronological order with the book, and I do expect everybody to watch this video and follow along. In this unit, by discussing the basic elements of theater of the absurd, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern isn't the model of theater of the absurd. It's a tangent of theater of the absurd. It's more like a child of theater of the absurd. The best example I can give you of theater of the absurd is Beckett. I think that's one a lot of you have read, or at least know. I mean Beckett's play, Waiting for Godot. But the themes in that play are clearly also in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. And it's also clear that Stoppard, because he mentions it, is paying homage to Beckett when he includes these themes. This is like a parallel. So those themes will include loneliness in a world without God, an inability to communicate, and that inability to communicate is especially obvious in this play because what you will notice is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern often have lines, but those lines are ascribed to them by Shakespeare. They'll speak in elegant iambic pentameter, but then when the other Shakespeare characters leave the stage, they can't talk, or they can't make sense, or they're almost unintelligible. That's the point. They have trouble communicating because they have no true selves with which to communicate their ideas. The other thing is, really this is a play about dehumanization. Here, Stoppard's borrowing a philosophical concept from Hamlet. Hamlet asks, what is a man? And he describes him as something rather noble, although Hamlet's depressed, so man delights not him. But in this play, their existence, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's existence, really is much more like as a character in a play. And so the nature of their existence, the nature of their reality, is always in doubt and always in question. The other thing that's really in question is, do they or don't they have free will? The final theme of theater of the absurd that's really common and definitely appears in this play is impotence in the face of society and death. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern know, well, we know, they are going to die. And quite frankly, there's nothing they can do about it. I don't know, sometimes students disagree with me on this. Like, but what if they just made this choice or did this thing? Maybe they didn't have to die. Those students are wrong. They have to die. They are fated by their creator, Shakespeare, to die. That's going to be the end of them. There are a few names that you need to know. One is Eugene Ionesco. The other is the French playwright Samuel Beckett. French? No, he wrote a little bit in French. He's actually Irish. Yes, he's Irish. And then the last one is the guy who came up with the term theater of the absurd. His name is... Pause. Help me, thought bubble. His name is Martin Esslin. Before I begin my discussion of the play, I want to read you something really quickly that Tom Stoppard wrote about his own play. He describes it this way. What there is a series of conflicting statements made by conflicting characters, and they tend to play a sort of infinite leapfrog. You know, an argument, a refutation, then a rebuttal of the refutation, then a counter-rebuttal, so that there is never any point in this intellectual leapfrog at which I feel that is the speech to stop on. That is the last word. In other words, we never get that. I noticed in the movie version, the very first line of the play isn't heads, like it is in the play, but the very first line in the movie is, and then nobody says anything for a while. The play, of course, begins with the coin-tossing scene. Now, I'm on page 11, and there's a few philosophical questions that you need to ask yourself. First of all, obviously it's always heads, but what does that mean? And how does it frame our perceptions of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's reality? What did they deduce from the fact that it is always heads, individually and together? And what does this tell us about their characters? I do want you to notice that the characters react to the coin-tossing scene separately, differently. They look alike. In fact, they're just described as two Elizabethans or two courtiers. At the beginning of the play, they've forgotten even where they're going. They've been summoned to Elsinore, and so they've been passing the time flipping coins. And I think for Stoppard, that really is the beginning of their existence, just as that's the beginning of their existence in the play. They're also starting to ask questions about fate or destiny or free will. It's not like they're going to be answered in the play, because this is a play of ideas. We are just asking questions. On page 12, Guildenstern says this: a weaker man might be moved to re-examine his faith, and then pause, because it's a joke. If nothing else, at least in the law of probability. He knows that what's happening with these coins, heads, 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 it's not probable. It's not the thing that should normally happen. Guildenstern seems to me like the one who's always trying to analyze the situation. He says this: if the law of averages, if I've got this right, it means that if 6 monkeys were thrown up in the air for long enough, they would land on their tails about as often as they would land on their heads. Part of the joke there is a comment that philosophers have made about the nature of infinity or eternity. The idea, which is how you express what eternity is like, is that if 6 monkeys were pounding randomly on 6 typewriters all day, every day, eventually they'd type out all of the works of Shakespeare randomly. It's almost as if Guildenstern remembers something like that, but he doesn't really remember what he's talking about. What are we, the audience, supposed to think about the fact that the coin comes down heads 85 times in a row? Guildenstern says and teaches us It must be indicative of something. And then they remember there was that man, that messenger. And they keep using this phrase, he woke us up. Now, my theory has always been that messenger, like Godot. But in this play, it's not God. It's the person who really woke up Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who gave them an existence. That's Shakespeare. And his name will never be mentioned in this play. On page 13, Guildenstern says that these endless series of heads must be indicative of something. He says it must be the law of diminishing returns. And then he says, I feel the spell about to be broken. And he sort of more dramatically flips a coin. And then, of course, it comes down heads. And he says, well, it was an even chance if my calculations are correct. The truth is, it seems like it should be an even chance. 50% heads, 50% tails. But for him, in his world, and his world is the stage, his world really is this place where nothing is chance. Everything is scripted. There is no free will. It's going to keep coming down heads until forces greater than Guildenstern say it should. On page 16, Guildenstern comes up with a new theory. He says that these endless series of heads must be indicative of something besides the redistribution of wealth, and he starts to list the possible explanations. The first one, he says, is, I'm willing it. Inside, where nothing shows, I'm the essence of a man spinning double-headed coins and betting against myself in a private atonement for some unremembered past. But he's not willing it. I don't think he can will it. Some other force is doing it. And then it clicks heads again. I think the second suggestion is closer to the truth, at least, I don't know. The second, he says, too, that time has stopped, and the single experience of one coin being spun once has been repeated 90 times. And I must agree with him, on the whole, doubtful. His time hasn't stopped. He's still talking. They're still traveling. 3, divine intervention. Now, this one is closer to home because the divine in that world is Shakespeare. Shakespeare parallels God in this play. He says it like this, that is to say, a good turn from above concerning him, children of Israel, or retribution from above concerning me, Lot's wife. These obscure and nonsensical biblical references, that's something that Beckett used to do in Waiting for Godot also. All of the talk was meaningless, but occasionally Beckett would just throw in these weird biblical phrases and terms, much like Guildenstern is doing here. And then number 4, a spectacular vindication of the principle that each individual coin, spun individually, is likely to come down heads as tails, and therefore should cause no surprise each individual time it does. I learned this on the roulette wheel. Just because if the roulette wheel hits black 20 times in a row, the odds that it's going to hit black on the next spin, it's about 50-50. It doesn't work that way. I mean, that's how choice is. Every chance of that flip is a 50-50 chance, no matter what preceded it. On page 16, Guildenstern asks Rosencrantz, what's the first thing that you remember? Remember, they've only been in existence a short time. And Rosencrantz thinks for a minute and he goes, it's no good. It's gone. It was a long time ago. In other words, he doesn't remember anything. Nothing. On page 17, there's a lot of questions. It's what I would call a volley of questions, like tennis. But these questions also show up in Waiting for Godot. Are you happy? In Waiting for Godot, the response is, I am happy, but he's clearly not. But I like it in Beckett. When Beckett does it, one of the characters goes, are you happy? I am happy. What do we do now that we're happy? In this one, he says, are you happy? What? Content, at ease. And what are you going to do now? Because they realize that they exist, but they don't know who they are or what they are intended to do. And then slowly they start remembering there was a messenger. And Guildenstern starts thinking in terms of unsub or supernatural forces. And then he makes the connection. Page 18. Then a messenger arrived. We've been sent for. Nothing else happened. 92 coins spun consecutively had come down heads 92 consecutive times, and for the last 3 minutes, on the wind of a windless day, I've heard the sound of drum and flute. Now, drums and flutes both appear in Hamlet, especially flutes. They're kind of a motif. Remember, Hamlet says something to them about, you think you can play on me like I play on a flute? And then they start talking about death, but they don't do it poetically the way Hamlet did. Rosencrantz says things like, the fingernails and the beard grow on after death. I'm not sure that's true, but that's what he says. I think your body shrinks a little bit. Maybe it looks like it. It's nonsense, but it raises an important question. Because we've all listened to Hamlet go on and on with this question about death. What does death mean? This is an existential play in that sense. Is life meaningless? These two characters, as much as any character in any play, they're trying to find meaning in a meaningless world, at least a world that's meaningless for them. I want you to look at page 19. It's a short dialogue between Guildenstern and Rosencrantz, and Guildenstern asks Rosencrantz, do you remember the first thing that happened today? And Rosencrantz doesn't really answer the question directly. It's not like, I remember it. He just says, I woke up, I suppose. And then he does have a memory. Oh, I've got it now. That man, a foreigner, he woke us up. Now again, who's that man? And what do we mean? Because there's an elevated meaning of the phrase, he woke us up. It's more than woke him up. He gave them life. Guildenstern says, a messenger, Rosencrantz. That's it. Pale sky before dawn. A man standing on his saddlebag to bang on the shutters. He shouts, what's all the row about? Clear off. But then he called our names. You remember that. This man woke us up. Yes. We were sent for. Yes. That's why we're here. Traveling. This dialogue is important because it's the first time in their lives they've come to some understanding of the meaning of their existence. They know somebody woke them up. They know that they've been sent for, but that's really about all they know. So as they're traveling, and I'm on page 21 now, as they're traveling, the actors show up, the acting company, the tragedians. And the player, the head of the acting company, the player king, he screams, halt, an audience. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern ask them what they offer, and he says something kind of weird. He says, we can do you a selection of gory romances, full of fine cadence and corpses pirated from the Italian, and it doesn't take much to make a jingle. Even a single coin has music in it. Now, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern don't know their names yet, but they're interested in this. But make no mistake, there's sort of two things that are being offered here. One is just prostitution. They're offering him an opportunity to play act and have sex with the young boy Alfred. It's a disgusting proposal, and it's pretty it's so awful it's comical. But the other thing that they're offering them is to get caught up in the action. But in essence, that's what's going to happen. As soon as Rosencrantz and Guildenstern find themselves actually in the play Hamlet, they will be caught up in the action. That's what the player does. He involves them in the action of the play. He draws them in. They become tragedians also. They're caught up in the action, even though they don't know anything. On page 23, you get to my favorite line in the play. Rosencrantz asks the player king what they do, and he answers, "Tragedy, sir." That's an important lesson. That's actually, I think, one of the things that Stoppard is trying to teach. He's trying to teach us something about the nature of tragedy. Now, one thing you're going to need to learn later is that tragedy is old. It comes from the ancient Greeks. And the way Stoppard is describing tragedy, the art form, is as it's been influenced over time. The player king says, "Tragedy, sir, deaths and disclosures, universal and particular, denouements, both the unexpected and inexorable, transvestite melodrama on all levels, including the suggestive, and we transport you into a world of intrigue and illusion, clowns if you like, murders, we can do you ghosts and battles on the skirmish level, heroes, villains, tormented lovers, set pieces in the poetic vein, we can do you rapiers or rape or both, by all means, faithless wives, ravish virgins, flagrante delicto, at a price, but that comes under realism, for which there are special terms. Getting warm, am I? Make no mistake, what he's offering them is obscene. A private, uncut performance of the rape of the Sabine women, or rather woman, or rather Alfred. But they, the other thing that they are sort of doing is they're getting caught up in the action. On page 34, I noticed that Guildenstern is asking the player king about his costume, and the player king is telling him, "I never take my costume off." That's because, and Guildenstern says at the top of page 34, "always in character," and that's just it. These characters, which is really all they are in fact always in character. And if they exist at all, they're on the stage. They did have one final bet with the coin, and there's some suspense building because I think it's the player king who has his foot on top of the coin. But right as the player king leaves, he takes his foot off the coin and it's tails. Now, that means that clearly something has changed. Something dramatic has changed. And literally at that exact same moment, that's where Hamlet and Ophelia come running on stage. Now, the descriptions of them are pretty much borrowed straight from dialogue from Shakespeare. They look in the classical way. I mean, the part of this play that is Hamlet is usually done in almost the most traditional Hamlet director way you can possibly do it. Just make it look like the classical, Hamlet dressed the way Hamlet is in all the sort of like college productions. Anyway, so they're mute, but it's clear this is that scene between Hamlet and Ophelia where he's telling her to get to a nunnery. And it actually kind of scares them. And then you have this flourish, and in come Claudius and Gertrude. Now, for pages 36, 37, all of that is the play Hamlet directly out of Shakespeare. There are a few things that you should notice because these are the things that are important to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. One is that the king and queen don't know who's who, which is true of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern themselves. I think that's why in the play, well, anyway. So they've been given some directions. One of their directions is to go up to Hamlet and glean what afflicts him. That's an interesting word, glean, like well, anyway, they're supposed to capture it, they're supposed to cut it, they're supposed to take what afflicts him and report back to the king and queen. And in poetic verse, in poetic meter, that's what they say they'll do. They're just saying Shakespeare's lines. The other thing that they're told is that they're going to get rewarded for this. They're going to get as fits a king's remembrance. Now, I think of this as a joke, because if a king remembers you, he might give you gold, but he also might give you he might murder you. And that is sort of their future. As fits a king's remembrance, well, let's hope he's not a suicidal or a homicidal maniac of a king, which Claudius is. Anyway, so as the actors from Hamlet leave the stage, which is on page 38, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, you should notice this, they can't talk. I'm out of my step here. We'll soon be home and high, dry home it's all out of my depth. It doesn't make sense. So they've seen this. They don't know these people, but at least now they have something to do. And Guildenstern thinks, well, let's just do what they asked us to do, and then we can go home. I'm not sure what home is in this existential play, and maybe they don't really remember their own home anyway. But at least they have something to do, because they remember the man standing on his saddlebags. In the half-lit, half-alive dawn, he banged on the shutters and he called two names, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. That means that they have choice. They have options, but they don't have choice. Because the one thing we know about these two characters is that they don't have free will. So Guildenstern understands that they're being controlled by outside forces. The fate of the coins is at work. And Guildenstern also notices that they've been, and this is his words, caught up. He says, your smallest action sets off another somewhere else, and is set off by it. Keep an eye open, an ear cocked, tread warily, follow instructions, and we'll be all right. And Rosencrantz sort of agrees, and he says, but for how long? Guildenstern, I think he feels like he's got this all figured out. We'll just stay here till events have played themselves out. There's a logic at work. It's all done for you. Don't worry. Enjoy it. Relax. In other words, he's saying, okay, everything that's going to happen to us is already pre-prescribed. We know that there's a force that's greater than us that's sort of dictated everything that's going to happen and everything that we're going to do. I mean, think actually of the implications of this, if this is in fact true for God, that every day we're getting up and every choice that we make has really already been made for us. It's actually kind of frightening. Anyway, he says, relax, to be taken in hand and led like a child again, even without the innocence of a child. It's like being given a prize, an extra slice of childhood when you least expect it, as a prize for being good or compensation for never having had one, like a childhood, which he hasn't. But do I contradict myself? So they analyze what they're supposed to do. And the line that keeps coming back to them is, glean what afflicts him, him being Hamlet. And they go off of what they've already been told. Guildenstern's line goes, words, words. It's all we have to go on. It's an allusion to Hamlet saying words, words, words. But how do they glean? And the answer is going to be question and answer. And then as soon as they figure that out, in comes Hamlet. He crosses the stage and he's reading a book. This is that scene where he's looking and acting all crazy, and it's the first time Polonius goes to him when he's looking and acting all crazy. And he's kind of acting crazy, but he's also really mocking Polonius, at least in the traditional Hamlet play. Sometimes this is called the library scene because Hamlet's looking at books. Words, words, words. And it is, in the play Hamlet, that's the time when he seems most mad. Then you get this very funny scene. Guildenstern tells Rosencrantz that he's going to pretend to be Hamlet, and Rosencrantz can ask him questions, and then they'll figure out what's wrong with Hamlet. It takes Rosencrantz a little while to even understand the directions, but once he gets it figured out and he asks them a few questions, which basically sums up the play Hamlet, or at least the first half, Rosencrantz says, okay, to sum up, your father, whom you love, dies. You are his heir. You come back to find hardly was the corpse cold before his young brother popped onto his throne and into his sheets, thereby offending both legal and natural practice. Now, why exactly are you behaving in this extraordinary manner? Guildenstern's response, I can't imagine. But all that is well known. It's common property. Yet he sent for us, and we did come. I mean, a good question to ask is, other than the simple, is why Rosencrantz and Guildenstern? Why did Claudius send for them in the first place? A good question for us to ask ourselves is, why does Shakespeare need these two characters in the first place? Does their death reveal something about Hamlet? Is that why they're important to the play Hamlet? And how should we look at them in the original play Hamlet? Are they treacherous spies, or are they bumbling idiots who just don't even have the intellect or the insight to deal with somebody like Hamlet? I'm not sure I know the answer to that, and different directors have answered that question very differently. In Hamlet, at the very, when Hamlet first sees them in the actual play, he calls them his excellent good friends. Is he being mad? Is he being crazy? Or is he being nice? He doesn't seem like he's in a mood to be nice. But that's how it begins, which is also how Act 1 ends. I'm going to record my Act 2 notes on a separate video, and both of these will be posted on Haiku. By the time I see you guys next in class, you should have watched all my videos. I wish I could do this better, but thank you for watching.